Hey everybody, we're back with the next section of the sock pattern. We're using my favorite vanilla sock pattern from the Unapologetic Knitter, and we have worked the cuff for the pattern. I've made my leg section smaller than what she calls for in her pattern, and now I am ready to work on my heel flap. So when you work on your heel flap, you are only working on your back needle. So I'm going to ignore this knitting here in the front, and I'm just going to work on this back needle. We're knitting flat right now. It's a 4-row repeat consisting of slip stitches and a garter edge. So all you're going to do is follow your pattern. It's my favorite vanilla sock pattern from the Unapologetic Knitter. And we are going to knit this until we have as many garter rows as the size you're making calls for. Okay, so I'm working a wrong side row right now. So I'm going to knit my first 3 stitches. And then I am going to purl across. And when you are purling across after you've done the slip stitches, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to your stitches, because it's pretty easy for them to kind of blend together, and you can miss one when you're going back across. So I'm just going to purl this. And there are all different kinds of ways to make socks. It's kind of like magic. So you just need to follow the pattern, because if you trust the process, it will work out, generally speaking. So I'm almost to the end of my row. And on this pattern, I purl all the way to the end of the row. Okay, and I'm going to turn my work, because remember, we're knitting flat right now while we're working on our heel flap. And the first thing I'm going to do on this row is I'm going to roll 3. Sorry, I lost my camera there for a second. So the first thing we're going to do is purl 3. And then this has a alternating slip and knit. So on this row, I'm going to slip my first stitch, and we always slip purl-wise. So that means you put your needle in like you're going to purl, and then you pull it off. And then you knit the next stitch. And it's a little bit fiddly with these double points, but I like using them. It makes it a little nicer. So here's, I'm slipping and I'm knitting, and I'm going to do that all the way across. And like I said, this is a 4-row repeat. So based on your garter stitches and your pattern, you should be able to read your work fairly easily to see what row you're on. Go all the way across. And on all of our wrong side rows, we just purl, and we just make sure, here, we knit our last stitch. We started with the slip, so we knit our last stitch, and then our last 3 are always knits or purls, depending on which row you're on. And you're going to work like that until you have as many garter rows as you need. And you can always tell how many garter rows you have by counting the purl bumps. So this is you should be able to see based on how many of these bumps here at the edge you have. So now I'm on the wrong side of my pattern again. So I'm going to do it just the way I did before, where I knit 3 and I purl to the end of the row, being careful to make sure that I don't knit my slips. I don't purl my slip stitches together with the knit stitch next to it. And to the end of my row. So once again, we're turning our work, because the heel flap is worked flat. That's going to accommodate for the back of your foot and your heel. It's got to be longer than the front of your knitting. So that's why we do it like this. And so I'm going on to the next portion of the pattern, where I am going to purl the first 3 stitches, knit 1, and slip 1. So it's the opposite of the way we did the last row. Knit 1 Slip one. Remember, we're always slipping as if we're going to purl our work. That keeps our stitches going the correct direction, the right orientation, that kind of thing. And you're going to do this until you have completed the number of rows that the pattern calls for. And then I will meet you back here for turning the heel. Okay, so now I finished my heel flap, and if you count your garter rows that you have on here, you should have 14 of them for the size I'm making. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And so I have 14, and I'm supposed to start with my wrong side facing me, which is where I am. Here's my yarn. So I'm ready to go. And what we're going to do now is we're turning the heel. And this is kind of the part of the instructions that sound like magic. And it might be a little confusing, but it's one of those things where you just kind of have to trust the process and it'll work out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to slip one stitch purlwise. And then for my part of the pattern, I am going to purl 14 stitches across. So I'm going to purl the next 14. And 14. And then after I do that, I'm going to purl 2 together. So I'm going to purl these next 2 stitches together. And then after I purl the 2 stitches together, I purl 1. And I'm going to turn my work now. These stitches over here don't get worked right away, and that's fine. That's normal. It's how it's supposed to be, even though it might feel weird. So now I've got my right side facing me, and I am going to slip 1. And then we're going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. And then it's a slip, slip, knit. And so when you do a slip, slip, knit, you slip your stitches knitwise. So 1, 2, and then you transfer them back to your left needle and you knit through the back loop. So, oops. So slip, slip, knit. And then we're going to knit 1. And now that's all we're doing for that row. And we turn our work again. Like I said, it feels weird to not work the whole row, but just trust the process. So for this next row, we're going to slip 1. And then the instructions say purl to 1 stitch before the gap. And I will show you guys what that looks like. So I'm going to purl across here. It's actually very handy because my yarn happened to change colors right when I started doing this. So it's easy to tell, but it's, even so, it's always easy to tell because when you get to the spot, you can see that there's a gap. So here I am, I purl to 1 stitch before the gap. See here, there's a nice big opening from when I turned my work around the last time. I'm going to purl these 2 stitches together. And then I'm going to purl 1. And so then we turn our work again with the right side facing us. We slip our first stitch, and then we're going to knit to the gap. And when I get to 1 stitch before the gap, see, you can tell there's my big gap again. I'm going to slip it knitwise, slip the next one knitwise, and then I just put my left needle in the front there and I knit through the back, and then I knit 1 more. And you're going to keep working in this manner until you have done all of the stitches. You'll go through, and at the end, there will be no more gap and you'll be at the end. So I'm going to purl across. Here I am, I'm 1 stitch before my gap, as you can see. I purl these 2 guys together. And then I purl 1 extra stitch. I'm going to go back the other way 1 more time, just so everybody's got a clear understanding. I slip my first stitch, I'm going to knit to 1 stitch before the gap. Now that I'm 1 stitch before the gap, I slip knitwise, slip knitwise. Put my needle in here, knit 2 together through the back loop, and knit 1 more. All right, I will see you guys when I'm done turning the heel, but as you can see, we're starting to get that cup shape. this is where the very back of your heel is going to go. You can see we're starting to make that shape so it fits in. Okay, here I am. I'm just about at the end here. I've purled all the way across to my gap. I'm going to purl these two together. And then I purl one, and that brings me to the very end of my row. And so then I turn my work, and I'm going to slip, and I'm going to knit across to the other side. And then this is a slip, slip, knit, slip, slip, knit, and then I knit one, and I have worked all of the stitches of my heel, as you can see. So it's got that nice little cup here where your little heel is going to go. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pick up our stitches. And so all of these garter bumps that I showed you before, that's where we're going to pick up our stitches. So I'm going to come into my first garter bump, and I need to pick up 14. So there's 1, 2, and this can be really difficult. So don't beat yourself up if you have a hard time doing it. You can always use a crochet hook if it helps you grab your little stitches, or, you know, whatever. There's 3. You might notice that I'm picking up 2 strands of yarn generally if I can. I'm super hard on socks. It's part of the reason I don't generally make them. So I feel like it's a little bit more secure if I can get a little bit more there. I want to make sure it's got a pretty good spot that it's hanging out. It's not just going to be all willy-nilly on the edge there. I don't want it to come undone. And then it says pick up 1 more stitch in the gap, and then you're going to knit. This part gets a little awkward, but you're going to knit 14 stitches from your front needle that we ignored for a while. We're going to knit them onto this one because we're redistributing our stitches. Oh, and I need a stitch marker right here. Okay, so now that I've finished picking up all my stitches, I'm going to put a marker right here where my heel stitches end and the top of the foot stitches begin. And I'm taking 14 of these and putting them onto this needle here. So I'm just going to knit 14. Okay, and now that I've knit 14 there, I'm done with this needle for now. I'm going to pick up my other needle that's been neglected. I'm going to knit these 14 stitches. Okay, so I've knit the 14 stitches of the top of the foot. I'm placing another marker. And then, once again, it's a little bit awkward, but we're going back to picking up stitches along the edges. So we're doing it in reverse. So the first thing we're going to do is this gap here between our garter rows and the top of the foot stitches. We're going to get in here, grab a couple of strands, not a bunch, but a couple. Try to make sure you get like the leg of a stitch and another one so that it doesn't turn into some weird hole, because this is what we're doing is we're grabbing this here so that it doesn't turn into like that weird hole that you sometimes get when you're making socks, and you can obviously see where you were working. So there's my first stitch, and now I have to pick up 14 more along this garter row. So like I said, it's a little tricky. Just do your best. And you might see I missed a garter row here, but that's not the end of the world. We will get through it together. So the good news is that really nobody's going to be looking that hard at your feet. Okay, so now I've got all of my stitches picked up, and then because we're redistributing how our stitches are on our needles, we're going to knit the next 8 stitches onto this needle. And it's awkward, and good luck and Godspeed, because it doesn't feel like you should be able to, but you'll be able to. So we're gonna knit the next 8 stitches onto this needle. 8. Okay, now that has happened. We should have 37 stitches on each needle for this part of the pattern for the size I'm making. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work the gusset. And after everything we've done, this should go pretty easily. Our pattern says that we should work to 2 stitches before the marker. So I'm just going to do that. Some of my students said that these stitches on the sides are kind of tight and awkward, and they might be, but as you work them, they'll even out, loosen up a little, so don't worry about it. So now here I am, I'm 2 stitches before my marker. I'm going to slip, slip, knit. So I'm going to slip, knitwise, slip, knitwise. I'm going to bring my left needle into the front and knit through the back loop. And then you slip your marker. And then you just knit around. Now we're going to be coming down the other side. And it's the same thing, except on this side, because we're decreasing the heel now. We've got a whole bunch of stitches on our heel because we just picked up all of these stitches along our garter edge. And so it's going to be flippy floppy if we let all those stitches be there for the rest of the sock. So we have to decrease on the sides again so that we get back to having the proper number of stitches for our socks. So I'm going to knit to the marker. And once again, remember, when you're working with double points or magic loop or whatever, make sure you snug up those first stitches in your rounds, or you'll get weird ladders and gaps, and nobody likes that. Okay, and now, since we're doing the decreases on the heel side, we have to slip the marker, and then we are going to knit 2 together on this side. So you just knit them 2 together through the front loops like your regular knitting. Okay, and then we're just going to knit across. Now we're on to our second round, and this is the round that we're going to repeat. We're going to do this round and then a knit round following our pattern. Knit until we're 3 stitches from our marker. So here we are, 3 stitches before the marker. We are going to knit 2 together, knit 1, slip our marker, and knit. Okay, so I've slipped my marker. I'm going to knit 1. Then we're going to slip, slip, knit these 2 dudes together. And then when I finish this row, I'm going to knit a plain row. And we just repeat rows 2 and 3 until we are back to 28 stitches on both needles, or whatever size you're making, whatever size, whatever your stitch count is for that size. For my size that I'm making, I need to have 28 stitches on each needle.